Hello, this is Mr. Chabry, and we're here with another narrated Pokemon battle. So this is another battle against Vito. Last time we battled this person, it was a really close battle, a lot of switching, and I really like battles where there's a lot of predictions like that. So this time, let's see if we can get another really good battle like last time. This time, I'm going to lead off with Chansey. Of course, looking at my team, it's some Pokemon that I haven't used in a while. I don't feel like... Yeah, I haven't used Mega Alakazam in a while. I want to use that thing again. It's really good, and it can get a surprise sweep if you're lucky. But I'm going to lead off with Chansey instead of going for a Stealth Rocks like my opponent predicted there. We're just going to go ahead and Seismic Toss because I do see the Espeon on my opponent's side. My opponent's going to go for a Trick. We're going to unfortunately lose our Eviolite, but that's not too much of a problem because this Espeon is not going to benefit from it. But we are stuck with the specs. It's actually really bad for our Chansey though, because Chansey, being a wall, does not want to be locked into one move. I'm going to go into Lando. I really need something to pivot out here, and unfortunately we're going to send out Lando. It's not going to take Psychic the best, but it's really one of the only things I could think of that would threaten out the Espeon. But now my opponent's going to go into the Delmise, and I'm going to hard switch into my Rotom here. And unfortunately, this is not the best matchup for me because this thing, being a grass type, will be a problem. I'm going to Will-O-Wisp it though, stay in and just Will-O-Wisp, because I know Delmise is more of a physical attacker, so if I can burn this thing, that's going to help me out a lot. And unfortunately, we're going to take a nasty Power Whip, but since we burnt that thing, that's going to give us a chance to survive the Power Whip. So that Will-O-Wisp is really turning out to be a very, very important thing for us. So now I'm going to have to keep my Rotom alive, so I have to switch it out. I'm going to go into Lando. We're going to intimidate this thing. We're going to make it harder for this thing to do any damage on us. So that's what we're going to do. Power Whip now is not going to do hardly anything to our beautiful Lando. Of course, Lando is taking some nasty damage. I probably should have kept Lando healthier throughout more of the match, but this is my Z move user, and I'm just going to go ahead and pop my Z move. This thing doesn't really have good recovery options on it, so we're going to go ahead and just pop the Z move and just let it do whatever it needs to do, and we will be able to take out this Delmise with the Supersonic Sky Strike. I was honestly hoping my opponent will switch into something else that I could take out with that move, because this Delmise was pretty much crippled. It's not going to be doing much, but I'll go ahead and take that. But now my opponent brings in the Mimikyu, and of course, Mimikyu is a Pokemon that has Disguise. You always have to pop that Disguise before you can do any damage to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and U-turn. That will pop the Disguise, and that will give my Lando another chance to intimidate something later on. So looking at that, that's probably the best play for me at this point, because even though Lando is low on health, it still has some useful things it could do. It could come in on that Tyranitar for one, and Tyranitar looks like a pretty big threat, if I'm honest. So now this thing's going to Shadow Claw. It has gotten a Swords Dance, and it's going to do a lot of damage to Toxapex, even though this thing is very defensively bulky. I'm just going to go for a Haze, get rid of that stat boost, and I really think that's one of the most important things for me to do at this point. I need to get rid of that stat boost. That thing is a big threat, so we're going to do that. And now Galvantula is going to come in, and of course this thing is also a pretty big threat, especially to my Toxapex, because Toxapex does not want to take this thing on. I'm going to just Scald. We get the burn. I would much rather have that burn on Mimikyu, but I'll take it on Galvantula, I guess. I mean, this thing is a special attacker. It's not going to bother it that much. I'm going to switch out my Toxapex, get some more health on that thing, because Regenerator is such an awesome ability. And I'm going to go into Chansey. This thing can take special attacks all day. You see that Energy Ball barely does anything to this thing. Chansey, it would have taken it a lot better, especially with that Eviolite. So that's the problem right now. Of course, that Sticky Web is up. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to get Stealth Rocks, because I do not see my opponent bringing in the Espeon here, because that's what my opponent did first turn. I think my opponent's predicting me to predict the Espeon. Like I said, this right here is a big, prediction game, and I got the right prediction there. So Now there are Stealth Rocks on my opponent's side, and my opponent's going to go into Tyranitar. Of course, I cannot stay in with my Chansey because if I'm locked into Stealth Rocks, and Espeon coming in would suck. But I have to switch out anyway, so I'm going to go into my Lando and intimidate this thing. And this thing's going to go ahead and Mega Evolve, so this is my opponent's Mega. And Mega Tyranitar is pretty scary. Tyranitar by itself is very scary. But Tyranitar is one of those Pokemon that are really good, and its Mega is also really good. So this thing is actually kind of scary, and it just got a Dragon Dance. And I'm going to U-turn, trying to get some sort of chip damage, but it's not going to be that much chip damage because Tyranitar does have a lot of bulk. But this thing has 1+ speed. It doesn't have that attack boost, however, since we did intimidate it. But I'm going to go into Kartana, and the problem is those sticky webs are up. So that's going to slow down Kartana, and this thing at +1 will outspeed Kartana, and we take a nasty Fire Punch. So unfortunately, we're going to lose our beautiful Kartana. I was hoping Kartana would be able to do something, but this thing has some coverage moves available to it, and that's the thing about Tyranitar. You don't know what you're going to face. Of course, I've seen a lot of people bring like special attacking Tyranitar sets, but I'm going to go out to Lando, get another Intimidate, and this time I'm going to make a prediction. Go into Toxapex, predicting this thing probably has Ice Punch, but instead my opponent goes for Iron Head, telling me this probably doesn't have Ice Punch, because Tyranitar, like I said earlier, is one of those Pokemon that has a bunch of coverage moves. But now that I'm in Toxapex, I could easily Haze at this point. My opponent's going to switch out knowing that and bring in the Galvantula. I just go for a Scald because, honestly, thinking about it, I think a Burn would be more advantageous than just going for Haze, because honestly at this point my speed isn't really going to be helped by going for Haze, and we have a sticky web on our side of the field, so it'd be better just to burn that thing. So my opponent sends out Galvantula, it goes down to the Scald, and now this thing is out here, and I don't really want to stay in on an Espeon, but my opponent predicts me switching here. The question is, does my opponent predict me switching into the thing that my opponent wants me to switch into? So yeah, I'm going to actually switch out Toxapex. I'm scared of Espeon, but my opponent brings out Tyranitar, making a good prediction, knowing that I probably go into my special wall, the Chansey, but Chansey does not want to face a Tyranitar. Tyranitar has an easy way of knocking this thing out. Of course, my opponent goes for a Stone Edge, and unluckily for my opponent misses that, and I get a nice Seismic Toss, and we almost have this thing knocked out by that. But yeah, I kind of played it risky there. I was actually hoping my opponent would just Dragon Dance. I didn't want it to give my opponent a free Dragon Dance, mainly. So that's why I went for the Seismic Toss. But I can see my opponent's going to go more on the offensive here against the Chansey. So I'm going to go into Toxapex here, and unfortunately that looks like it's about a 2-hit KO. So I can't stay in because that means I would lose my my very bulky and very great Pokemon, Toxapex. I'm going to go into Lando. I'm actually sacking this thing off. At this point, Lando has done his job, but my opponent misses the Stone Edge again. So that's unfortunate for my opponent, but it doesn't really matter because the next turn my opponent connects. So Lando didn't really get to do anything anyway. So I'm going to go into Rotom here, and like I said, I really would like to burn this thing, but of course this thing is going to be faster, and unfortunately Rotom takes that really horribly. I'm going to Volt Switch here. Of course, there's no point of burning this thing because this thing would go down to anything. And my opponent can't even switch it out because of those Stealth Rocks, so I just Volt Switch, and unfortunately we took some nasty damage there on our Rotom. I'm going to go into Toxapex because my opponent gets the switch advantage here because my opponent gets to see what I send out, and then my opponent can send out anything in regards to that. And my opponent's going to go into the Tornadus. So I don't really want to stay in because I know most Tornaduses are special attackers, but I do know that they can get some physical moves as well. They do have decent physical attack. So I'm going to go into this thing because, like I said, most of them are special attackers, so Chansey can sponge that pretty well. It takes it like a champ, but now my opponent's going to go for the Focus Blast and miss, so that's actually very good for me, and I'm just going to Toxic at this point, because I know Tornadus does have the Regenerator ability, so it could be a problem taking this thing out. So I want to get this thing poisoned. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So now that this thing is poisoned, of course my opponent still has the Espeon, I do believe. But yeah, I see the reward of going for Toxic there is much more than the risk of, getting Toxic back onto Chansey, because Chansey's really not going to be doing much in the long run. But I'm going to go into Toxapex. This thing is now at full health, and it actually takes the Hurricane very well, because Toxapex, like I said, it's a very bulky Pokemon on both defense and special defense. I love Toxapex for that. It's one of the best pivots. But now my opponent's not going to stay in, not since Hurricane is barely doing anything, and my opponent's going to go into the Mimikyu, and I'm just going to recover because I thought my opponent would probably stay in. I wanted to stall out the Tornadus, but looks like my opponent made the smarter move into going into Mimikyu. Of course, my opponent's going to go for a Swords Dance, which is kind of scary, but I'm just going to Scald. I'm hoping for the burn. I didn't want to go for Haze and, over-predict, so I actually went for Scald, hoping that I could take this thing out, but unfortunately we don't. And I'm going to take another nasty Shadow Claw, and I have to Haze here. I can't, just go on the fact that I might get a burn. So we eliminate that stat boost right there. I really want to get a burn on this thing, though. So we're going to take a Shadow Claw. Of course, we will take this pretty well, because seeing that it takes a +2 to even do about half to us, we should take that pretty well. And I'm hoping we get the burn. That's what I'm really hoping for at this point. But my opponent's going to go ahead and get that Swords Dance up again. This is actually kind of scary because depending on how we play this, Mimikyu could be a pretty big threat coming from this thing here. But I do get the Scald burn that time, so that's actually very, very nice. We have this thing burnt, and now it's on a timer, and it's not going to be doing that much damage to us. So I'm going to actually switch out. Toxapex is such a good Pokemon. I'm going to actually, at this point, send out Chansey, because I'm expecting this thing to go for a Shadow Claw, because that's what my opponent's been doing this whole time, and it can give me some free turns of stall here, because, Shadow Claw is not going to touch Chansey at all. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go back into my Toxapex. This gives Toxapex some more health with that Regenerator ability, and I do think my opponent goes for a Fairy-type move at this point, mainly because Chansey doesn't care about a Shadow Claw. I don't know what this thing's full-on set is, but my opponent actually pops the Z move at this point, which actually ends up being the Let's Snuggle Forever, so of course we're going to have to flip the image because, Pokemon has a weird thing where they block certain Z moves, and we don't want to risk it because it's not just the Z move being blocked, it'll block the entire video. So we're going to have it where we're on our side, but the same thing is happening. Toxapex is getting some lovin's from the Mimikyu, but it's not going to do much because Toxapex is a very, very good physically defensive Pokemon, and it resists Fairy-type moves anyway. This thing will finally, it's not brought down completely to its burn, but it's getting there, and my opponent goes for a Play Rough, probably expecting me to go into Chansey. Here, I'm just going to go for Toxic Spikes. I would like to poison anything that comes in at this point. I think Espeon's really the only thing that can be poisoned, but I think it would be good to get that thing on sort of a timer. But I do know that it doesn't matter what I go for because, of course, that Mimikyu is faster, and this thing is going to get poisoned, plus it's going to get those Stealth Rocks damage, so it looks pretty good for us. I'm going to send out Chansey, let Chansey be the thing that sponges these hits as this thing finally goes down to poison, because Espeon here does not have much time left. So we're going to take a nasty Psychic. Of course, Chansey doesn't care. Chansey takes that like a champ. So this thing will go down to the poison. So that's really good for us because we didn't really have to do much there. Toxapex is still really good on health, and as we saw earlier, Toxapex can take the hits from this Tornadus like it's nothing. Of course, my opponent will go for the Focus Blast and connect this turn. Chansey's already done its job. It's really done its job, so we're going to just let that go down. We don't really need to worry about Chansey at this point. But now, this thing is poison. It doesn't have much time left. I'm going to go into Rotom. get some sort of chip damage on this thing. Of course, this thing is actually faster, so it doesn't really matter. Rotom will go down to the Sludge Wave, but it'll give us some more turns of poison on this thing, and this thing is toxic poison, so it's going to start stacking on it. So we're slowly whittling this thing down to a point where I can bring something in and finish it off. So now I want to send out my Alakazam. The problem is the sticky web, so I'm not totally sure if we would outspeed. I think we will, though, because Mega Alakazam has crazy speed. So I'm hoping that we'll outspeed, and we can finish this thing off with like a Psychic. So I'm going to go ahead, Mega Evolve. Of course, we're going to trace its Regenerator, which doesn't really matter at this point. But yeah, this thing's actually going to outspeed us, so even with Alakazam's crazy speed, that sticky web will slow us down, and we're just going to Psychic this thing for the victory. So Mega Alakazam comes in and cleans up the game, but yeah, that was actually a really good game there too. A lot of predictions. I got a lot of really good predictions there early on when I expected my opponent not to send out Espeon. Of course, that was very risky going for, you know, toxic Stealth Rocks with an Espeon on my opponent's side. But, yeah, so if you like this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you in the next Pokemon video.